We were talking yesterday about the history, and AZM used to be known as the AZF, the American Zionist Federation. Before that, the American Zionist Council, which opened the Washington office in about 1951, which became AIPAC. So we'll claim a little bit of yichus there, or Yerusha, to use the Hebrew word, of our colleagues at AIPAC. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I must apologize. I won't be sitting on the panel, but I'll say a few words and then be on my way. I first want to thank Richard and Herbert. This is an amazing event, and I want to take also a note of Heidi's role as well in putting all this together. So thank you very much. We're very pleased to be able to participate in this. And I think the theme today that you've all heard is an extremely important theme, and that is one of bipartisanship. And it's been stressed by all of our speakers. People may have somewhat different definitions of what bipartisanship means, but I think we all recognize that in Washington you can't get anything done unless you're able to work with both parties to see legislation passed. And in this past year, we've already had a great deal of success. People mentioned the Taylor Force Act as an example. Also, the major security assistance for Israel was passed in the last omnibus appropriations bill. We're talking about Hezbollah legislation, the second version that passed earlier this year. Last night, the Human Shields legislation passed, and a whole variety of other initiatives that really don't get any press play at all, but I think are extremely important for the future of the U.S.-Israel relationship, such as moving forward toward establishing a center of excellence between the United States and Israel in the areas of energy and water. The Farm Bill just passed one of the houses yesterday. We expect it will pass the next house shortly, which includes additional funding, additional authorization for the BARD program, the U.S.-Israel Binational Agricultural Research and Development Program, in terms of building food security and cooperation between the countries. And I can go on and on. The enormous support in Congress for the U.S.-Israel relationship is bipartisan. It's alive and well, and it's producing real results. I think the most important piece of legislation from a substantive position that remains on the U.S.-Israel agenda for this year has been referenced by many of our speakers today, including the leader, and that's the U.S.-Israel Security Assistance Act that we hope to see move through the Congress, through the Senate, actually in a final version in the next few days. This bill not only authorizes for 10 years $38 billion in both foreign military financing for Israel and in missile defense funding, but it also alludes to many of the other areas I talked about of enhancing cooperation between the United States and Israel and sort of carving out a path for the future of our relations. And so we're extremely grateful when the Congress completes this and hopefully sends it on its way to the President. There are two other pieces of legislation on the U.S.-Israel agenda that I just want to call attention to, and these are the Combating BDS legislation and the Israel Anti-Boycott Act. And I just want to say that you've seen perhaps a number of stories in recent days, accusations by some in our community that and beyond that these pieces of legislation in some way impede free speech or impair the rights of Americans to exercise free speech. And I just want to say that I think that's really a slander against the authors of the legislation, in particular Senator Ben Cardin of my state of Maryland, who has been the primary author of the Israel Anti-Boycott Act. They have taken every possible step to ensure that the rights of Americans are protected in legislation. Ben Cardin did it this year. He's done it in previous years when he worked on anti-boycott legislation. And we think it's extremely important for people to understand and to be able to answer the arguments that are made by organizations like the ACLU that this legislation is contrary to the First Amendment, that it's absolutely not the case. This is bipartisan legislation supported now by 16 Democratic senators as well as 17 Democratic senators as well as 41 Republican senators. The most recent individual who added his name to the legislation was Cory Booker of New Jersey. This legislation very much will act, we hope, to discourage compliance with the foreign policy of organizations like the UN Human Rights Council and in support of the foreign policy of organizations like the United States government. It will prevent companies in their commercial activity from responding to boycott requests or requests for information by international governmental organizations. It is merely an extension of existing law that we've had in the books for 40 years to protect American companies against the Arab boycott. This legislation will now help to protect those same companies against the UN Human Rights Council or any other international governmental organization that requests it to take certain action. Any American, thank you, any American company that for whatever reason on its own decided it wants to not do business with Israel, no one will impose upon that American company the need to do business with Israel. All this says is that if the United Nations is coming in and demanding of you certain information or that you report on others that are carrying out certain activities that are legal under United States law, you may not answer those boycott requests. So we are extremely passionately in favor of this legislation, as well as the combating BDS legislation, which is legislation that says American states that take measures against BDS are not preempting the authority of the federal government. Again, this legislation does not in any way impair free speech. It does not in any way affect the rights of individual Americans. What it says basically is that if a state takes action, that is in accordance with American foreign policy of resisting such boycotts. And so we are extremely excited about the possibility that this legislation will be included. And just want to thank all of you for what you've done in support of this bill. And I express my apologies that I have to be on my way, but I want to thank the AZM for this wonderful event. Thank you so much.
Thank you.